So we're living in an interesting time right now in America. We keep hearing reports about how DHS and the FBI were and maybe still are involved with content moderation and speech on the internet. Mike Schellenberger has been talking about this recently with his reporting on the Twitter files. Recall that The Intercept put out an article a few months ago about how the DHS has been involved with social media companies to screen for misinformation and all of that wonderful stuff. And as I keep stressing, I think this is clearly an issue with government getting involved with speech and content moderation. And the solution is to defang the government, so to speak. Remove any bureaucrats or officials who have been involved with this malarkey. Maybe draft some legislation that gets the government out of social media. I certainly do not think that the answer is for politicians to start wielding antitrust or repealing Section 230, neither of which would solve any of these problems. Either way, it's an issue worth thinking about. This does seem alarming, the fact that the FBI and DHS are breathing down the necks of social media companies. And what are politicians doing to resolve this? What are they currently focusing on? Well, we have Republican Senator Mike Lee from Utah. Mike Lee seems more interested and eager to get the government further involved with regulating and moderating speech and content on the internet.
You absolutely suck!
But before we get into Mike Lee, I want to read an excerpt from an essay that Ayn Rand wrote on property rights over the airwaves. This essay was written in 1964, and it can be found in the book Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. I'm going to start right here. Ayn Rand says, the Act of 1927. By the way, this is a really interesting essay for a variety of reasons. I decided to brush up on it last week. So I highly recommend checking out this entire essay on your own time. It's very relevant to today for a variety of reasons. But Ayn Rand says, the Act of 1927 granted to a government commission total power over the professional fate of broadcasters with the public interest as the criterion of judgment, and simultaneously forbade the commission to censor radio programs. From the start and progressively louder through the years, many voices have been pointing out that this is a contradiction impossible to practice. If a commissioner has to judge which applicant for a broadcasting license will best serve the public interest, how can he judge it without judging the content, nature, and value of the programs the applicants have offered or will offer?
Really makes you think.
If capitalism had any proper intellectual defenders, it is they who should have been the loudest in opposing a contradiction of that kind. But such was not the case. It was the statists who seized upon it, not in its defense of free speech, but in support of the Commission's right to censor programs. And so long as the criterion of the public interest stood unchallenged, logic was on the side of the statists. The result was what it had to be, illustrating once more the power of basic principles. By gradual, unobtrusive, progressively accelerating steps, the Commission enlarged its control over the content of radio and television programs, leading to the open threats and ultimatums of Mr. Minow, who merely made explicit what had been known implicitly for many years. No, the Commission did not censor specific programs. It merely took cognizance of program content at license renewal time. What was established was worse than open censorship, which could be knocked out in a court of law. It was the unprovable, untangible, insidious censorship by displeasure, the usual and only result of any non-objective legislation. So again, this was written in 1964, and it would not take long for the FCC to get involved with regulating obscenity and indecency on broadcast radio and television. George Carlin's 7 Dirty Words are a notable example, infamous example. For those who don't know, I think the comedy bit that Carlin performed, it was played on a radio station, which drew complaints to the FCC. According to the article on Wikipedia, in 1973, John Douglas, an active member of Morality in Media, pay attention to this organization, by the way. I think it goes by a different name these days, but they were obsessed with regulating, with tattletaling to the FCC about people breaking indecency and obscenity standards. John Douglas claimed that he heard the WBAI broadcast while driving with his then 15-year-old son, Dean, and complained to the FCC that the material was inappropriate for the time of day, approximately 2 p.m. Following the lodging of the complaint, the FCC proceeded to ask Pacifica for a response, then issued a declaratory order upholding the complaint. No specific sanctions were included in the order, but WBAI was put on notice that in the event subsequent complaints are received, the commission will then decide whether it should utilize any of the available sanctions it has been granted by Congress.
Blow it out your ass.
Wasn't just Carlin and the broadcasting stations that amplified him. It was also Howard Stern. And I actually, when looking into this, I didn't know there was an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to the issue of the FCC fining Howard Stern alone. And according to this Wikipedia article, on April 16th, 1987, the FCC concluded that Stern had aired indecent material several times. In some instances, his broadcast did not merely consist of an occasional off-color reference or expletive, but a dwelling on sexual and excretionary matters in a way that was patently offensive. No fine was imposed since the FCC believed there may have been some uncertainty as to the reach of the Carlin case and that its Section 1464 indecency provisions were applied for the first time in a number of years. Infinity was instead warned of the risk of fines or the loss of its broadcast license if violations occurred. The investigation caused the FCC to expand its indecency standard beyond the 7 dirty words to language or material that depicts or describes in terms patently offensive as measured by contemporary community standards for the broadcast medium, sexual or excretionary activities or organs. Then the article continues down here, talking about how a radio station in Washington, D.C. became the third Infinity station to air The Howard Stern Show in 1988. 2 months later, Ann Stommel of New Jersey mistakenly tuned her radio station to hear Stern talk about having naked women in for an upcoming show. She recorded the Christmas party broadcast on December 16th that featured a man playing the piano with his penis, a choir singing about gay sex to the tune of White Christmas, and women being hypnotized to achieve orgasm. Under the referral of her senator and congressman, so it sounds like she was coached by politicians into filing this complaint.
You absolutely suck!
Stommel filed a complaint with transcripts and tape of the program. The FCC reviewed the evidence and asked Infinity in October of 1989 for an explanation, as the material may have violated federal law by including indecent programming during daytime hours. And as you can see, the station eventually got fined. And if you read this article, there's multiple examples of Howard Stern and the radio stations being fined for indecent programming. And also talking about morality in media. They come up in this article on Howard Stern. They were involved with the shakedown of Howard Stern at times, it looks like. And we see references to the FCC maybe threatening to withhold licensing, as Ayn Rand alluded to in her essay on broadcasting on property rights over the airwaves. So why do I bring all of this up? Well, Mike Lee's bill, which is done in the name of cracking down on internet pornography, largely in the name of saving the kids. Mike Lee put out a press release on this topic. As you can see, dated December 13th, 2022, Mike Lee says, obscenity is not protected speech under the First Amendment and is prohibited from interstate or foreign transmission under U.S. law. Now, it is true that obscenity traditionally has not been protected under the First Amendment. I think this is an improper application of the First Amendment, but Mike Lee talks about how obscenity is difficult to define, let alone prosecute under the current Supreme Court test for obscenity under the Miller test. Going on to say, as we consider the application of the Miller standard to the internet, we run into serious challenges. Which contemporary community standards should be applied? Yeah, contemporary community standards. Where did we hear this? We saw this with one of the Howard Stern cases. The FCC, in terms patently offensive as measured by contemporary community standards. I think this is important to note because I can imagine someone might show up and pick nits saying that George Carlin and Howard Stern and the broadcast stations that amplified them, well, they were technically cited for indecency, not obscenity.
Blow it out your ass.
Whatever. I think it still applies considering that Mike Lee is invoking standards that has gotten applied to Howard Stern. Mike Lee says, or what applicable state law should be applied to determine patent offensiveness? Because the internet is a channel or instrumentality of interstate commerce, Congress's current obscenity prohibitions are severely diminished. In response, Senator Lee is proposing the Interstate Obscenity Definition Act, which would establish a national definition of obscenity that would apply to obscene content that is transmitted via interstate or foreign communications. And it looks like it codifies much of the Miller test into law, saying the act would define obscenity within the Communications Act of 1934 that, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest in nudity, sex, or excretion, depicts, describes, or represents actual or simulated sexual acts with the objective intent to arouse, titillate, or gratify the sexual desires of a person, and taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Yeah, I guess that's the purpose of the First Amendment. So long as it has some serious literary or artistic or scientific or political value. Who defines what constitutes serious artistic or scientific value? I guess a government bureau like the FCC.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Mike Lee adds that this law would strengthen the existing general prohibition on obscenity by removing the intent requirement that only prohibits the transmission of obscenity for purposes of abusing, threatening, or harassing a person. And of course, this all has the religious conservatives all excited, like Matt Walsh. He was talking about this on his podcast the other day, but he tweeted out that this all sounds good to me. Matt Walsh, again, he calls himself a theocratic fascist. I often hear people defend him saying, oh, well, he's just joking. It's tongue-in-cheek. He's just adopting these smears that his enemies call him. I don't know. Considering this and his calls to legislate morality in the past, I'm starting to think that this theocratic fascist label is not some tongue-in-cheek joke. But I guess I'll let you guys figure that out. As an aside, Michael Knowles the other day was doing a speech at America Fest Turning Point USA, and in this speech, if you watch it, you'll see that he talks about how he's not a free speech absolutist and how he supports obscenity laws and blasphemy laws. And I think this is a healthy reminder that a lot of these religious conservative culture warriors, they're not going to save free speech from the woke left or the PC police. And I've made videos about the whole ban porn debate before. I'm not going to rerun that today because I think this looks like it could go possibly beyond just banning pornography on the internet. How do we know Mike Lee's obscenity standard? How do we know that it will not be applied to, say, humor or memes or jokes or comedy skits or even maybe sex education or dating advice? I may ask, do we really want to give the FCC the authority to moderate and to regulate speech and content on the internet? I say, going back to morality in media, which has a history of trying to shake down George Carlin and Howard Stern, I could totally see left-wing activist groups, which we all know there's no shortage of these days. I could totally see left-wing activist groups using these laws, these obscenity standards, as a means to try to silence, censor, intimidate, or punish people. We could also see social media companies. We could see social media companies start taking a greater interest, becoming increasingly obsessed with moderating speech for obscenity and indecency to avoid getting shaken down by the FCC. It's bad enough that we have these cocksuckers at the FBI and DHS breathing down the necks of these shit social media companies. The last fucking thing we need is another cunt organization like the FCC getting involved with moderating content on the internet on behalf of complainers, tattle tits, piss ants, power-lusting politicians, and motherfucking activist groups. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you guys think we need to get the government further involved with moderating and regulating speech and content on the internet? Why don't you let me know in the comment section down below?